labor. Close quote from page 86. In the context of the 1849 Treaty of Hidalgo, when Mexico officially gave up rights to California, quote, "The fact that the land was taken under such questionable circumstances and that the Mexican people involved were not treated humanely as required by a legal treaty should be taken into consideration when discussing the future of Aztlan." Close quote from pages 103 and 104. Quote, "Many of the Mexicans living in the U.S. today are the so-called illegal aliens who have come to the U.S. seeking jobs, hope for the future, and a better life. By the year 2000, Latino populations of Aztlan will become the majority population of this area. Latinos are now realizing that the power to control Aztlan may once again be in their hands. Effective voter registration and turnout could make great changes in the political leadership and life here in the U.S. Southwest. It is important to realize Mexican-American brotherhood with the people of Mexico. We must realize that on both sides of the border, we are people native to Aztlan." Close quote from pages 105 to 108. The book is entitled Mexican-American Heritage. Call the district office, 805-963-4331, 805-963-4331, if you share my concern. End of article by Sandy Beckers. While I thank Sandy Beckers for reading that information into the public record, and I thank Ron Culver for reporting it, I am quite frankly disgusted by both of their responses to this invasion. Both of them, in summing up the situation, state that their objection is not to Mexican invasion and occupation of the United States per se, but in the unwillingness of the Chicanos to go through the legal motions, to assimilate to the American language and culture, or to give their loyalty to the regime in Washington. They decry the separatism of the Chicano invaders and openly wish for them to learn English, salute our flag, and be good workers and consumers, just like the Blancos. Presumably, if they did those things, Culver and Beckers would be happy to have one of them marry his or her daughter. I could not disagree more. I do not want the Mexicans here because virtually all of them are of an alien race, and their presence is incompatible with our civilization and with our very survival. It does not matter what language they speak. A Spanish-speaking European is our racial kin, even if he knows not a word of English and never will. Furthermore, as long as these invaders are here, their different language and adherence to the culture of Aztlan keeps them at least somewhat insulated from our culture and makes intermarriage less likely than otherwise. So until the happy day that our races are separated, let them have their Spanish language education, and let them have their dreams of Aztlan. Whatever keeps us apart is good. Whatever brings us together is bad. Whatever brings us together with the masses of the third world hastens our descent to their hell. The descent into the third world isn't only happening in America. In Germany, for example, the huge influx of non-whites has caused much conflict and resentment, especially among poor whites, who are always the greatest victims of non-white immigration. both economically, due to having to compete with third world laborers, and physically, because unlike the rich elites who implement these programs, poor white people are always expected to live and work without complaint among the non-whites and their always attendant violence and crime. If the white workers object to this exploitation, it is defined as racism and hate by the billionaire media moguls and their government. But even in Germany, where white guilt is even more skillfully inculcated than in the United States, there are some limits on how many non-whites are allowed to enter the country. There are some requirements which a non-white immigrant must meet before being allowed to adorn Germany with his odoriferous presence. Generally, an immigrant must declare that he fears persecution in his homeland, or that he has some special skill needed by Germany before he is allowed to jump on the gravy train. That these requirements are interpreted very loosely is evidenced by the mulatto babies paraded by white mothers in German streets, a disgusting sight often seen in the United States as well. But even these loose restrictions were too much for the self-chosen people. Chafing at having to prove or declare anything to anybody, in 1990 the Jews demanded that Jews fleeing the results of their creation, Soviet communism, be allowed into Germany in unlimited numbers. And the government of occupied Germany said, yes, of course, at once. And all limitations on Jewish immigration were lifted. Of course, Ukrainians fleeing the chaos of the former Soviet Union, or Russians, or Chechens, or anybody else, still had to play by the rules. Only Jews were exempt. Some animals are more equal than others. But in June of this year, Der Spiegel magazine reported that the government was considering placing some limits on the Jewish influx, since there was no credible evidence that they were being persecuted, and that most of them merely wanted to enter Germany for economic reasons. I might add that many of these Jews from Russia are criminal underworld types who form the vast majority of the members of the so-called Russian mafia organizations now sprouting up wherever these persecuted angels have planted their colonies. As soon as the Jewish organizations started screaming persecution, the Germans capitulated and in fact denied that they ever had even considered taking away the special privileges of God's pets. Never mind that making someone obey the same rules as everyone else can hardly be called persecution. The State Secretary of the German Foreign Ministry, Werner Hoyer, stated that not only were there no plans to place limits of any kind on Jewish immigration, but that the only plans the government had were to, quote, combat abuse of the program by non-Jews, close quote. Horrors. Horrors! Non-Jews taking advantage of a program designed for Jews. What is it with these Russians and Ukrainians who don't know their place? What chutzpah! Of course, this Jewish immigration can in no way be described as third world immigration. But the leading architects of the browning of Europe and America have been and are the leaders of organized Jewry. If you dare to question the racial transformation of your land, you will soon find out who your real enemies are.